Hey everybody, how are you? It is nice to see more of you guys here today, and hopefully some of you are now done with boards and you can refocus on your fellowships. I am really biased when it comes to global emergency medicine. And most of you who have met me or interviewed me know that my biggest concern about the field that we're in is the scalability of engagement, right? Like for many of us, like the reason we do global emergency medicine is because it's like a deep-seated passion, right? Like in my gut, I can't tell you when I became this person, but this has always been a part of my identity. And whether you pay me or not, I look to global emergency medicine. The challenge with that is that it's hard to sustain, right? You can't just stack your shifts. You can't just pay for your travel out of pocket. I mean, you can, but when you treat global emergency medicine as a hobby field, then it becomes non-sustainable, but also the partnerships, you don't have the opportunity to build the capacity to give those partners, and help them develop and grow as well, which is your ultimate goal. So I think funding is really, really important, right? And again, you're always a bit dirty, right? Like talking about funding again. But I think it's like a really important dialogue to have. And that's why I invited today's speaker, Adam Alucio. So Adam, oh, and we should record this. That's okay with everybody. So people are always of shit. I vote you. But Adam Malucio, I think I mean, a couple of years during his fellowship. He's assistant professor in emergency medicine with him picked in the division of global emergency medicine at the Albert School of Brown University. Um, s- Started his training at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. He has an MPH in developing countries from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. It has actually been really wonderful for me having Adam in this field because our research has really intersected. The way that we have changed the world is we have as many people as possible doing really good science that informs policy, um, and the strategic direction of the science of our field. And so I invited Hanvi to talk about his funding journey. But we're also to brainstorm with folks here about how we fund your funding journeys so that you can have a meaningful, thoughtful, sustainable career that doesn't just, dissolve into feeling burnt out in 5 years and exiting our field. Because the main goal of Brew is if more of us can like do this work that's meaningful to us in a way that's sustainable long term. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Lucio. Thank you everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Bhakti. I assume I'm coming through okay. And yeah, everything Bhakti said is true. We'll delve into those points a little bit more kind of throughout the talk. Kind of my path was a little bit circuitous, but has kind of always been in the sort of research aspects of global emergency care, global health. And I do feel strongly for a number of reasons that that's a good place to be, whether it's your primary home or just something you access to help support your work and your collaborators around the world. Research can be a powerful tool to do that. So I think understanding of the sort of landscapes and the paths that are out there is an important thing to do. So I'm going to share some slides here, then we can talk through a couple of things. And if I make this full screen.
I think at the bottom it says enter full screen on the menu that you just had open.
Oh, thank you. There we go. Good. And now I can still see your beautiful faces. And I can't see the chat, so just holler at any time. Kind of if people want to talk about something or stop me, and if I'm rambling too much, just rein me in. It's okay. So this is about funding work. For a lot of the reasons Bhakti mentioned, it's important to do so, and in doing so, we can have longer term and hopefully more substantial impacts in kind of the collaborations we have around the world. So the disclosures are nothing relevant for this talk. I have some support for my research and I'm at Brown, but nothing that would be anything of key importance around what we're going to talk about today. And kind of what we are going to talk about is these kind of few high points, and kind of think through them a little bit more. So this is just kind of what I call step one, and that's just a way to think about when you're making a decision about taking part in a project. And part of that is, where the support comes from for that project, and sort of what the available ways to access that support are, and understanding the global funding landscape around global health research, and how global emergency care does or does not fit into that, right? We'll talk through sort of just an example of kind of what my career path has been over the last bit of time, and sort of what options are for people to think about and access different types of funding sources. But focus in on NIH Career Development Awards a little bit, because I think they're important. I'd like more of us to kind of move towards accessing those. You all, within the fellowship tract and space, are sort of the people from emergency care and global health that we want to kind of slot into that area. So we'll do a little bit more deep dive on that, and then just some take homes around it, and hopefully some discussions and kind of brainstorming as a group. So this is a way to think about things in life. So it's what I call the PQ, the project picking paradigm, right? So this is the way one of my mentors once taught me to think about, working on accepting or not accepting a project, right? So someone presents something to you, and this is really oriented to be about how this can improve and contribute to, things that you care about from an academic space. There's some, non-present externalities in this, like family time, other external commitments outside of your career, that those are not in this equation per se, as well. Kind of whether the project actually is meaningful and impactful, and is doing good things in the world is not necessarily part of this. But these are sort of the three things you should think about, when somebody's presenting a new project or you're thinking about developing a new project, right? So does it align with the passion and, the kind of the things that you hold important in life, and that you hold important in your career, to be able to, impact the world, right? Does it give you progression? Meaning, does it advance your career, or the careers of those that you collaborate with, right? So is it going to help build yourself and others, to advance along the trajectory that you want to go on, whatever that may be, right? And then the last component of this, and the dirty one that nobody ever wants to talk about, is money and time, right? So does it actually pay you to do what you're doing, right? Does it give you time or support your time to do what the project is about, right? So these are just sort of the three focal points that I look at, when I'm thinking about a project. If something fulfills all three of these, then it's probably a go, right? I mean, if it's my passion, it's helping progress my career, and it's paying me to do so, or supporting my time to do so, that's usually a go project, right? If it satisfies two of these things, then it's highly considered. If it satisfies one of them, it's unlikely. But sometimes if it's passion and that's your passion, then that's okay, right? So I'm helping out with a new emergency training program in Kenya that just sort of came online over the last year, and I will get no career advancement. I will get no money for it, but it's something I care about, and the people who are working on it are important to me. So it's something I'm going to help with. So passion and progression, those are the easier parts of this sort of trifecta. But the time and the money is the harder part. And that's kind of what we want to think about now a little bit more, right? So, kind of understanding, as we kind of grow and move through our careers, where the money is pretty important. If we think about an overview on that in the world, right? So this is looking at basically all the expenditures on global health throughout the world, right? And we can see, it's pre-pandemic, it was, about 35 billion is what the world is spending on global health. Not nearly enough, but that's what's out there, right? We know with the pandemic in 2021, there was a spike in that, no pun intended, with a large increase in global health allocation for funding. That's pretty much come back to baseline at this point. But this is kind of how much money's out there that we can think about, accessing for our work, right? The nice thing for us about this is about a third of it comes from the US, right? So we have inherently fewer barriers to reaching that money than people from outside of the US, because we're a little xenophobic and we like to spend our money on our own people. but that's a upside for us, and it's also an upside for people we collaborate with because we have a higher ability to access funding within the global health space. Right? So about a third of all the money in the world spent on global health comes through the U.S. economy. But where does it go? Right? So it goes to kind of the big things we kind of all know where the money goes, right? So HIV gets about 5.5 billion, right? I know the biggest portion. The Global Fund as well gets a large portion. Other specific disease processes, malaria, TB, maternal child health, also fairly big expenditures. So a lot of it is infectious and transmissible diseases, some NTDs, right? But not a lot of non-communicable diseases and no injury, at least by name, right? So what's the problem with this for us, right? And is the emergency medicine paradox, right? So there's no specific area or sector that emergency medicine is earmarked for. Right? It's everybody's problem, and it's nobody's problem. Right? And this is sort of a recurrent theme you'll see in thinking about funding and supporting your time and supporting your work. The take home from that is, we need to think about this, when we're looking for funding. Excuse me. And we need to find the aims that we can mesh with these other areas where we know the money is, right? So Willie Sutton, the bank robber, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money was, right? So the work I do, and I know Bhakti does as well, at least some of it, is in HIV research. Do I love HIV research? No, but that's where the money is, right? And I love global health research, and I love emergency care research. So I leverage HIV funding, to help support that work and help develop systems around HIV in relation to emergency care, in the hopes that it can help advance the overall field as a specialty, right? So just think about where the money is, and be flexible in how you're going to approach it. The other aspect of that is, that's global health funding, right? Research in and of itself is important, because as persons from academia, which all of us are in some way, shape, or form, right? We have an easier time to access money through a research space than any other real mechanism. I know a lot of people want to do programmatic work, which is excellent and commendable. Education, systems development, all important. But the truth of the matter is there's much less access for funding particularly for people from academia who have to balance an academic job and a clinical position than there is in going from a research perspective. So I always will, kind of urge people who are not necessarily research focused to think about research and M&E and, kind of evaluation processes and their work, because it allows for increased ability to support it and fund it. Right? And it's also the right thing to do in terms of ensuring that you're actually evaluating the programming that you're working on, the educational programming, whatever it may be, right? And it's having the intended consequences or the intended impacts that you want. The benefits and harm is something that really needs to be taken into account. So that to be said, just that research is a nice way to access funds that we in academia should leverage more than we do. And if we think about kind of where the research is happening in the world, or excuse me, where the funding for the research is happening in the world, we have a bit of luck again, in that, basically the NIH spends more money on research than anyone else in the world, right? Now, so 26 billion about is how much goes to the NIH. Granted, that's not at all global health research in terms of being the large proportion of it, but it is, the place in the world where we have access to the most amount of money for global health and global emergency care research. Which is again good for us. From the philanthropic side, the largest one is Wellcome, which is not even $1 billion. Right, so there's a very large area, of access that we can find there. And I bring this up again that I know not everyone is going to be a researcher, but building research into your programming or into the work you're doing is the nice way to be able to support not just your time, but the work itself, right? And also go to, to focus in on sort of systems development and what can be built from it. So then this is sort of an example of that. So this was work I actually did when I was a resident at SUNY Downstate in Kings County. One of my mentors was asked to give basically an educational program in India on kind of disaster mitigation simulation. So basically disaster awareness training for some nurses and physicians at a meeting there. the educational component was there, but not going to be evaluated or rigorously kind of designed. So we wrote a grant to EMRA. We got funding to support actual research built within the program, right? And that was able to support some travel support for myself and a few other investigators on the work and some of the teachers in the program. And it's just something we sort of published a small controlled trial we did from the work. Nothing fancy, nothing too substantial, but just an example that you can design research components within your educational programs or even your programmatic development work. And to do so will open up funding support and also hopefully allow you to kind of help build the evidence base and let others learn from the work you're doing. So if we go back to the NIH for a moment, we said that's where most of the research money is, right? And if you look at the NIH, kind of where is the money there? Well, it sort of follows the things that you would expect, right? So it's in infectious diseases, it's in cancer, it's in neurologic disorders, heart, lung, and blood, kidneys. That's really where most of the money in NIH is, in terms of institutes that have the largest shares of it to themselves. And if we look at the structure, I'm sure most people are kind of familiar with the NIH Gazette's, but it's actually this group of individual institutes, 27 of them, that each have their own sort of funding abilities. In terms of global health, most institutes will have some degree of global health funding that occurs within their institutes. The Fogarty International Center is the only one that has a specific mission mandate to support global health. The other things that exist there are health centers, and those are basically bodies that have personnel and staff, but don't carry out primary research and don't have funding that they can grant to people through applications. So this again shows, sort of that emergency care paradox, right? There's no specific place where emergency falls within this structure, right? Within the largest research funding body in the world, and the one that funds most of the work within the U.S. The point is, again, you need to kind of integrate your aims to how it fits with different support mechanisms and different institutes if you're thinking about NIH. And also, leveraging collaborations, right? So people who work within an institute or whose primary practice or research venue falls within a given institute, you need to collaborate with those people, right? It'll just make your work stronger. It'll make your application stronger. It'll also kind of help you be successful in accessing funds. Along those lines, as we said, the U.S. basically has the most money and contributes the most to global health and global health research. The bigger problem globally is that almost none of the money actually goes to people from low-income countries in terms of supporting them, right? So in 2020, there was about $37 billion spent in global health research, and 85 million of it was spent in low-income countries in terms of supporting people there, right? So not nearly enough. If we look at it by WHO region, you can see it's almost all in the Americas where it is spent. It's basically North America where all the money goes. The point of this is remembering how busy you are and how much you have, the people you're collaborating with on the ground, in different places have it that much harder, right? So, we need to be deliberate in kind of how we apply for funding, how we support partners we're working with and collaborating with. And that really does translate to money and time, right? So, as Bhakti mentioned, you can't do this as a hobby and you shouldn't do it for free. And, that's even more so for people that we're working with overseas. Like you think about the people we collaborate with, there's maybe 5 or 10 people in the entire country, right? That you can actually work with on the projects you're proposing, right? And me and Bhakti and you and everyone else is asking them to do the same things, right? But very few people are actually saying, okay, this is how I'm going to support you to do it. And we need to be more considerate and deliberate in that. It's one of the cornerstones in decolonizing global health, but it's one that I think often gets lip service, but not actual enough allocation of funds and resources to be able to do so. So just whenever you're designing something, just have forethought about it. I urge you to just really, really try to build into any grant you're submitting, right, and any support mechanism you can, ways to help those people that you're collaborating with. It makes their lives better, and it'll make the overall system function even better. So that's a lot of doom and gloom. It's it's not all doom and gloom. You know, there's a lot of pathways to success, and you know, there is hope that can come through this. You know, so it's, and as you guys are kind of moving through fellowship and beyond, you know, there's places you can go to find support so you can keep doing this work. So, you know, we can kind of talk about my path a little bit real briefly, you know, and then we'll kind of talk about kind of different funding mechanisms to think about and kind of some tips and tricks to navigate through those. So, you know, kind of in a nutshell, these are sort of the major players I've worked with and gotten money from over the years or learned from in different capacities. You know, so it's kind of a hodgepodge, right? And that's what most people's lives are going to be. You know, so don't be afraid to kind of look in lots of places. That's the upshot of there. If you sort of map out kind of the traditional path that I guess I sort of took. Oh, this is, I Googled a picture of myself for this talk, and this is the guy that came up. That's not me. But I kind of liked him, so I left him in there. You know, the way it kind of goes is, you know, it's progression and it's stepwise, right? And you know, kind of for myself, you know, there were student grants, you know, that I worked on, usually kind of institutional training level types of things. You know, so I was a Fogarty Scholar as a medical student, which afforded me kind of my first exposure to HIV research, and sort of set me on a path in that respect to that. You know, then through residency and fellowship, you know, small grants through foundations, you know, local institutions. You know, as a junior faculty member, I was able to get some university level grants and some foundation grants to kind of build from, take part in some early small NIH grants on R3, which is really a sort of an exploratory level grant, very small budget. And that kind of led me to the grant I have now, which is a K23, which is a career development grant, you know, through NIAID. And, you know, we'll be building for, you know, kind of subsequent funding at our levels. So this is just the sort of flow diagram of how it went for me. You know, there's a lot of ways to do this. This is sort of just an example of how it can be done. But, you know, before like kind of thinking about, you know, specific places to go, just some general thoughts and concepts on kind of how do you think about finding funding, right? And I think, you know, one of the most important things is, you know, when you're choosing the target of where you want to go, is really, when we're talking about money, match the scope of the project to the mechanism, right? There's a lot of creep in terms of how much we want to do, you know, with the getting research projects, but you know, a lot of the feedback I know and either I've received or I've given, you know, is keeping your scope reasonable, you know, feasible, right, and consistent with what you actually will have the support to be able to do, right? And research is designed to be incremental, right, and build, you know, so only answering part of a question within a given, you know, research proposal is acceptable. And people want to see that you're going to build from that and what your next steps are, right? Right. So, you know, money does get money in sort of the research area, but you know, assuming you're going for the right size of money at a given time is important to think about. The other thing around sort of choosing the right target, you know, in general is, you know, you want to know what the philosophy of the organization is, you know, and that can be their mission statement or kind of what their, you know, their things they do and definitively do not fund, you know, and that's, you know, kind of a step one in choosing a target. Often there'll be someone you can actually talk to, whether it's at a foundation, there's usually a point person, or if it's like an NIH type of thing, there's a program officer for every grant application that exists, right? So you can reach out to them, and you know, their whole job is to talk to you. Sometimes they're hard to get on the phone, but they will talk to you. You know, so you know, tracking them down and doing that, you know, as well, you know, kind of reviewing websites, and you know, every NIH institute has their mission, you know, what they're trying to do, you know, and these change every so often. So just reviewing those and making sure you're picking the right target for the type of work you want to do. You know, other things you can do is sort of talk to people who've had funding from this, you know, from the source before, you know, kind of things that have similar, you know, work to the ones that you're proposing to do, you know, and I was always getting feedback on sort of your submission before it goes in from either colleagues or mentors. All right, to ensure that you're picking the right target, because you know, spending 6 months writing a grant and then finding out that it's not fit for the funding mechanism is really not what you want to be doing. The types of grants that are out there, right? There's lots of them. You know, if you kind of think about them in big buckets, there's sort of private funding and seed grants, right? And these are very important, particularly in those early parts of, kind of the research career building process, right? And these are things like local foundations, kind of university grants, hospital level grants, department level grants. This, if you're at any sizable institution, then these will exist, right? And they really are something that are designed to be given to people in fellowship or early career stages, right? And the success rates are usually much higher than grants from outside of those places. So this is a paper, probably one of the ones I'm more proud of that I've ever kind of taken part in. So this was work I did actually during fellowship, and it was funded by a local foundation grant, very small one. It was like $10,000. And, basically it was an evaluation of the emergency care training program in Rwanda. And it was the first publication to show actual mortality benefit with emergency care training in Africa. It was done on a shoestring budget, 10,000, and of which I didn't get any time support for. But that's okay because it fit my passion and it, kind of, I think helped with my career progression. But it was important to me in that it really allowed us to really show some impacts around the program that had been implemented there. And it was also the faculty and the residents in Rwanda were very proud of this work. And it was just it was a nice thing to be able to do. Kind of other places to look for sort of seed funding, industry. They particularly, there's a lot more funding in global health from industry than people realize. A lot of it is sort of social responsibility and tax write-offs. But if there's something that meshes particularly with a specific type of industry, it can be a very good place to sort of look. Again, there's usually a designated point person, at any of these industry kind of funding mechanisms that you can reach out to and talk to. Device manufacturers as well are another sort of place where you can find support, particularly for material support. So, ultrasound type of work, which I know a lot of people find interest in. You can sometimes get, physical resources in kind, for that. Family foundations are as well, really a sort of niche type funding, but a place where you can actually kind of leverage less research focused work in terms of getting it funded, particularly for sort of programmatic development and education. In emergency care, there aren't a lot of them out there that I know of, but there are a few that have sort of come up over the last few years. So, it is a place you can kind of look at. And looking for foundation grants, these are kind of some of the bigger ones out there. But there's the Candid website, which is really a repository, of most foundations that do fund health are registered there. And you can kind of search it through a number of different kind of parameters and sort of search fields and really kind of narrow it down. At the end of the day, you're most likely going to end up having to talk to somebody, right? And kind of, dig a little bit deeper. But it's a good first stop in terms of like trying to find potential places where you can source funding for your work. Government funding, again, from the US side, the NIH is really the largest. The USAID, CDC, AHRQ, DOH, or DOD, excuse me, are other places, where there's fairly substantial funding that can be accessed as well. But, if you want to go NIH, then grants.nih.gov is really kind of your first stop in searching for funding mechanisms that you can access. McRae's.gov will give you sort of all U.S. funding aspects that are out there that you can kind of look through. Internationally, Medical Research Council, DFID, UKAID, ERC are all kind of other relatively large funding bodies. Again, not nearly as big as the U.S., but places that you can look for. In doing these, you always have to ensure that your application ability is consistent with what the citizenship requirements are and the kind of the requirements that may exist for a given funding mechanism, whether you're a U.S. citizen or a European Union citizen, that sort of thing. Excuse me. So that's a real quick blow through on kind of the big buckets of funding that kind of exist. I'm going to talk just a little bit about career development awards because I want more people to do them. So what they are, basically, there's 15 different mechanisms actually in NIH for career development awards, and they're exactly what they kind of say they are. So they're a way for people to advance in their career or to be supported to do so. So there's a component of training before it, and they are married. That training is married to some either research agenda or some larger research programming that's happening. They can be intramural, meaning outside within the NIH, or extramural, meaning outside of the NIH. They can be an individual level award or an institutional level award, and they can be mentored or independent. So there's a lot of different versions of this that exist. The ones that are most likely applicable to kind of people in our space are the K23 and the K01. So the K23 is your Mentored Patient-Oriented Research Career Development Award. That's for early career investigators, to kind of help bridge their time and their support to become an independent clinician scientist. And likewise, the K01. And the K01 is a little different in that it is what's called the International Research Scientist Development Award. And this is really designed for people with a focus in global. And there's actually a requirement that 50% of your time is spent overseas at your research site. There's only 3 centers that support the K01, so there's just not as many of them out there. But Fulbright International is one of those centers, so it is kind of something that could fit this audience a little bit better. So just a little bit more about kind of what the K01 and the K23 really are. As I mentioned, they're really designed to develop the applicant, the recipient, into becoming a clinician scientist. And this is sort of one of the goals at NIH, is to train more doctors to actually do research. You have to be within 5 years of your terminal degree, and that counts as fellowship, right? And you can't have had independent funding at a high level previously. They do occur 3 times a year in terms of applications for them. Just be aware if you're working in HIV, those are always due a month earlier than all the rest. And the Fulbright International Center for the K01, they only have 1 application cycle a year, and that happens in March. So if you're interested in that, you just need to be a little bit more aware that you'll only have 1 application a year. They're 3 to 5 years. Basically everyone does 5, and you'd be dumb not to. So always apply for 5 years. The nice thing about them is they give you 75% support, meaning the remaining of your time, the 25% of it is all you can possibly be allowed to do in terms of the clinical, teaching, or administrative effort. So it's really about research and training, which is nice. Now the funding for is a little bit tricky, right? So the salary support for K01 is $75,000 a year, and at K23 is $100,000 a year. Every MD who has one of these will have to have a deficit in terms of what they're actually bringing into the department and what the department is paying to cover the difference in their salary and the NIH cap based on this level of funding. So you need to be in a department that is supportive of having people on these training grants, which is not every department in the country, because they probably do function at somewhat of a loss. I've never been able to really figure out if that's true or not, but they're certainly not. They're not probably net positive in terms of financials for the department. The budgets for the work themselves are relatively small, right? So you think about an R level grant. Their research budget is going to be probably a couple $100,000 a year. The research for these is $25,000 for a K01 and $50,000 for a K23. So I missed a couple zeros there, which sounds like a lot of money now, but it's really not in terms of what you need to do to support your training program during your career development award, and also to complete your research. The indirect costs, so that's kind of the finance and administration stuff on the other side, is capped at 8%, which is a very small amount. Generally they're 20 to 50%, depending on your institution, is what those indirect costs usually are. So again, this is something that needs to be taken into consideration when someone has one of these, because that money needs to be made up somewhere else within the system. Now, the design is not really such that it is that inviting to a department to actually have people on these. But what they do is, they develop the person such that they can bring in more money later. That's really the drive. So if we look at kind of how many of these occur, kind of, and how they've sort of played out over time in terms of success rates. You know, you can see, you know, the red line with the individual points is sort of the percent success. So it's about 35%, which actually is not that bad. You know, you're in terms of like overall grant success at the NIH, it's much lower than that. So these are not an impossibility in terms of getting them. If we look at the different mechanisms, you know, we can see the K23, as we discussed, really is the most commonly awarded one. You know, over time, K01s have come up and become a little bit more common. K25s are a mid-career award. They're for people who are sort of changing from associate to full professor, generally speaking. And K99s are for intramural within the NIH, so not relevant to us. And then, you know, thinking about again, you know, when you need to integrate your work into places where money does exist, which is not emergency care by name, you know, thinking about where the money occurs for career development awards. And it's in cancer, it's in heart, lung, and blood. It's in infectious diseases. You know, it's NIDDK actually. It's diseases of the kidney. They actually do provide a fair number of these awards. Forward International, you know, a very small budget, but they, relative to other centers, they have a smaller budget in terms of absolute number of awards. It sort of mirrors a little bit. You'll see NHLIB, so that's heart, lung, and blood. They actually provide the most of these out of anyone. And then NIDDK is the second. Or excuse me, NCI. What about EM? As you could imagine, without having an institute by name, you know, we don't see a lot of these. This is data from 2011 to 2017, if I recall, by Peter and Kelly published this. You know, and it's not a lot, you know. So there are 34 K23s awarded in that time period, you know, and 9 K08s. A K08 is a early career development award, but again, it's people so focused in basic sciences. K12s are institutional level grants, so not necessarily for an individual applicant. The points they bring up in terms of kind of the barriers, I think, do really hold true, and you know, kind of things if someone's thinking about applying for one of these, to you know, kind of address early on in their application preparation period. Right, so you know, lack of mentorship is really one of the bigger things. You know, and you know, having mentors from a number of different fields is important, particularly, you know, when we're trying to get money from people outside of emergency medicine. Time for preparing grants and administrative support, like, you know, in terms of being successful in grant applications, having administrative support, you know, is one of the most important things. The looking a little bit further back, so this is 2000 to 2010, I believe, data, or excuse me, 2011, by Daniel. You know, 63K awards during that time period within EM specifically. And again, so it seems like the numbers are uptrending a little bit over the last decade of data, but again, not a whole lot, you know, given the number of awards that are out there. The upshot is, you know, it is successful. There has been success, right? So applications from EM do work, and you know, I know 5 people who are from Global EM who have gone through the K pathway. So you know, the numbers aren't large, but there is space to be successful in that. You just need to approach it correctly. So how do you do that? Well, you got to pick the best target. You know, kind of things we talked about. You know, kind of meshing your research focus, your training focus with the goals of the institute. You know, ensuring that you read the funding application completely. Pay lines are how the NIH kind of determines who will not get funded. You know, and they do vary from year to year and for each institute. You know, and they can be pretty substantially different. So reviewing those, and you really just need to Google them every year to kind of think about where you have the greatest success of being applying to. You know, and again, thinking about outside the box on this, if you need to go to NIDDK, and because you can somehow fit your ideas into the kidney space, then that's probably a good thing to do. You know, before you apply again, talking to the program officer, who will be listed on every funding opportunity, you know, about what the, you know, appropriateness of your application would be for their institute is important. Take time. Let's say 6 months is really the minimum. It's not just about writing the research, and it's also about corralling your mentors and getting letters, and lots of letters. You need letters of support from your department, from all of your collaborators, and as well from external references that are not part of your mentorship team. So it's a lot of paperwork on top of the actual research and the career development aspects you need to design. In the end, they're about 150 pages long, maybe up to 200, depending on it. This table sort of breaks down the meat and components of it. To know of those 150 pages, only 6 pages of it are your actual research strategy of what you're going to do in the 5 years. So there's a lot of other parts that are important, and some of that is, kind of you as a person, how you're going to develop, but really the letters that you have from your mentors, kind of the budget and the budget justification, just a lot of working targets that you need to work through. In terms of being successful with it, identifying strong mentors, really, I can't stress that enough. You want people who are art level funded through the NIH. At least the large majority of your mentors should be. Your primary mentor should have a track record of training take grant recipients prior. This is again the situation of money begets money. It's unfortunate, but it's the system we work in, and kind of maximizing your success when you're going to invest this much time in something is important. Your mentorship team needs to have the right experience to be able to guide you in the work you're going to be doing, and really you need to have somebody for every key aspect of your work in relation to kind of what you're going to develop in and what you're going to research in. It is helpful to have preliminary research. There's an old saying, the NIH only funds research that's already been done. I don't think that's completely true, but having work that you can point to as pilot or preliminary data is important, particularly if it's been grant funded. That is helpful. I'd say it's not a complete killer if you don't, but it will make your application stronger. And the other part of this is these are grants about you as much as they are about the research, at least theoretically. It's kind of telling your story and how you'll become a clinician scientist that's going to be able to contribute to the world following that work that they're going to fund. So leaning into that part of telling them about yourself and kind of your path is a large part of the application. Theoretically, it's supposed to be 50% of it, but I would say the research strategy, and someone who went through it a few times, is really the part they care more about. In terms of being successful, just making sure that you answer all the questions that are needed. This will be outlined in the application of the things you need to address. And if you have to resubmit, after a rejection or a retriaging, then answering all the questions that are brought up is important. Real quick on the review process, there's you scored on 5 domains. It's kind of yourself, your career development plan, your objectives, your research, your mentors, and your environment. You get a score 1 to 9 by 3 or 4 people, and then it's averaged and rounded down, right? And that's how you get your grant review score. Committee members then kind of vote on the overall score based on the 3 or 4 reviewers that you have. And then those people go to the study section for review. Only about 50% of submitted grants will go to study section and actually get discussed. So if you don't get discussed, then you're definitely not going to get funded. But if you do get discussed, then you'll get a summary statement and feedback from the discussion, as well as your score and your percentile rank. So that's kind of the K pathway and kind of the big parts of it. There's steps beyond that, right? So R01 level grants, these are your major project grants that you're going to do research with over generally a 5-year period. R21s are for smaller projects where you're going to either explore a new area of research or a new idea. R3s are very small grants, sometimes for retrospective data, sometimes for primary prospective data. R34s are also sort of pilot grants where you have sort of 2 phases where you develop something and then assess it in the second part. They can be for multiple years, but generally sort of 50,000 per year. There are a number of equivalents to sort of NIH level grants that exist in CDC, HRQ, and sort of different societies around the world, or excuse me, around the country, that you can look into. All right, so I've been rambling a lot. I'm gonna shut up. But the kind of take homes are, in all projects, think about kind of what the ways are to fit into your passion, kind of your progression, and as well how it's going to support you before you say yes. In terms of being successful within emergency care, kind of integrating what you want to do and what you're doing with other support mechanisms that exist is really important, and sort of leveraging those collaborations with people outside of EM to be able to access the funding that exists, and at the same time ensuring that you're supporting the people you're collaborating with. It's stepwise. It has to be. It's just really if you're gonna work in research, it's just kind of how you have to do it. One, because that's how you build an evidence base, but two, but it's also just kind of how the funding game works. I do think K awards are something that should be pursued by more people in global EM because I think we have a unique position to kind of think about problems around the world and also kind of address them, and building our clinician scientists cadre would be important. So I would like people to more do that, and I'm happy to help people in thinking about that as they go through. Then the other thing is, as I said, this is just one example of kind of how things go down, and there are a lot of ways to get there, but fitting the path to your trajectory is really what you need to do. But in doing so, if you can incorporate research, it not only will likely give you better access to support to be able to do so, but it also will hopefully improve what's known in the world and kind of, ensure that you're building the evidence base and doing, monitoring and evaluation in a good way, whether it's for education or programmatic work. So that's the take home. That's my email. And I will stop sharing and cough a little bit. Excuse me. And take some questions.
Thanks.
All was crystal clear. No questions.
I think you're thinking about a K or K-12 or a T32 that they're applying for.
Mm-hmm.
TSA.
I didn't talk about T32. So T32s are also an institutional level training grant that people can plug into. If they exist, they're actually really nice. If you have them at your institution, and we have a couple here, and actually I've recently kind of found out you can, depending on the structure of them, but you can actually slot into ones at external institutions as well. It's just a little bit more paperwork, but they're a very nice mechanism to look at as well. And they're invested in training people in sort of the same way as a K grant or a KL12, but they have less requirements than what you actually have to do. And generally a little less money. But so some of our fellows take part in them here, and basically how it works is they get $70,000 bought down against their current clinical hours, so they actually work less clinically, and then just have more time and support to do their research and training. So ask around if you have those.
There's a big challenge here, and it's like the elephant in the room. There's like nobody's, even including the Fogarty, we don't really like to fund education activities, right? So not like we try to put value science, original research. I think for education science, quantitative programming can be a part of that, but training emergency physicians in different countries and giving lectures and covering trial costs is not a part of that. That's like the big challenge. Right? If that was like the career that you want, then you need to really be looking at philanthropy, foundations, look at the colleagues at Mirabilis, look at the colleagues with Feathered Habit in Tanzania. And those are the few sustainable or institutional funding. So University of Michigan has invested in Ofanoche, and so they have this like deep funding-based commitment through an endowment to support the activities at for you Mish faculty in Ghana. Sometimes you marry your two mobbings, right? Like you can go do some training or you do research. But funders are kind of fine for research.
Yeah, I mean that's the upshot, right? There's these isolated examples that exist around the world, and they're usually tied to one charismatic person or one specific random event that occurred in time. But on a large scale, it's unlikely that that's going to be the order of the day when it comes to actually advancing this field. And as important as education and programmatic work are, which they absolutely are, if they're not going to, you won't be funded to do it, with a large volume.
Old American, when there is so many emerging leaders in the resource settings, they'll access appropriate knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah. But helping them, access research funds within the U.S., right, and supporting them to do so, really, I think is where we need to move as a group, and something I feel passionate about, and just really just being deliberate about that is so key, because we talk about it and we just don't do it. Is there anybody that's in sort of the K grant pathway right now? You guys are mostly first year fellows, second year fellows.
Okay, so it's overwhelming, but it does.
Mhm.
And the one thing I did mention is that in most cases not funded on the first round. Most are not funded
Absolutely.
on the first round.
Most grants are not funded on the first round.
And unfortunately for us, like nowadays the norm has become 3 to 4 rounds, right? So it's a deep institutional commitment for you to do that. So while you're a fellowship fellow, this is actually a good time, right? If you can get a bunch of wish in by the end of fellowship, then you get the first round done and your feedback here, which is really important.
Yeah, I don't know if you can submit as a fellow though, Bhakti. I think you have to be faculty, right? So the way I did it was I had my grant ready for semester on. Yeah.
Most fellows have the title of critical instructor because they're not ECG approved fellowships.
Okay.
They're considered as faculty with the instruction title.
Okay. All right. That works then. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. It took me multiple rounds to get mine funded, and yeah, it took me a couple of years, honestly.
Like Fogarty is great, right? So like I am a co-PI for the Fogarty Global Health Fellows Award. And that was Item's break. That was one of my big breaks. Break. So I really think if you guys want to apply for Fogarty, we have plenty of funding. And it is and it gives you some deep sea research experience and it gives you that preliminary data.
Yeah. And now there's an R1 through Fogarty, right? For the implementation science R1, they're funding it now, right?
They are. And
that's one of the things about Fogarty. They previously didn't have R1 funding mechanisms, right? So if you did your, the kind of idea with the grid level, you do the K, and then that institute keeps you, right, to kind of keep you going through the years, which Fogarty didn't have an R before, but now they do, so that's good.
Yeah, this is more. It's going to be done by the center, so it's going to be trying first. You and I got. Let's apply to.
Yeah. I think we have a call next week. We can talk about it.
Next time, 6th of March, we'll be talking about basic publisher research. And we're inviting Ellen Weber, who is editor-in-chief of ENJ. She's like the editor of a very developed country-centric journal. She has been a huge champion for getting researchers in Lurgy cell science to be able to publish and create a venue for that. And then I think she also has really good perspective on why is it important where you publish. I could share with you some of my grounding principles that I have as well. But it is really nice to see more of you here. So if this is helpful, please continue powering. I will share this recording with others. And then, Adam, I don't know if you're comfortable with this. I think if you want to share your slides, email that out to the group as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody has any questions about anything, you can email me anytime. I'm happy to chat.
More things, okay. All right,
everybody.
That was really well put together and very much appreciated.
Yeah, of course, anytime. Okay, take care, everybody. Be well.